It'd be nice if I had my mic on. Okay, welcome to the Infrastructure and Economic Development Committee agenda for September 27th at 9:45. Members of this committee are Mike O'Connor as the chair, Gladys Blackmore, who is online, Wendy Bosch, and Mayor Clayton is at a function at this moment. I will call the meeting to order. And we do have a delegation process under 2.1, Nathan Hayes Fry appeal. And I will just explain before we go into this, the process that goes with this. So after I call a meeting to order for the appeal, the introduction of appeal will be done by Brian Glavin, Chief Operating Officer. Third will be the appellant presentation by Nathan Hayes Fry, who will be given 5 minutes or so-ish. I'll be a little tough on that. And also 4 will be respondent presentation by Chad Sheldon, our Economic Development Officer, and I will also place the same constraints on him to keep it very brief. And 5, then questions from committee to either the appellant or the respondent. And then 6, join the appeal hearing and let the appellant and respondent know that the committee will now deliberate in camera and that the committee's decision will be provided in writing by legislative services within 7 days. 7, there will be deliberation. This can also be done in camera if the committee prefers. And then 8, close the hearing. Once the deliberation is complete, the public committee meeting can continue. Legislative services will provide the appellant and the respondent with a written copy of the decision of the committee once reviewed and approved by the committee members. So I will now call this meeting to order at 12 minutes to 10. And I will turn to the Chief Operating Officer, Brian Glavin, for the introduction of the appeal.
Thank you, Chair O'Connor. I'll keep this brief as I know both the applicant and the appellant, or the appellant and our administration both have detailed presentations. So Hayes Fry Law applied for a business retention and expansion grant. The application was refused, and today Mr. Hayes Fry is here to appeal that decision.
Okay, thank you. And now we will call the appellant presentation by Nathan Hayes Fry or representative. You may approach, introduce yourself once the mic turns red, and at least then we will know who you are.
Good morning, council members. My name is Nathan Hayes Fry. I am one of the co-founders and owners of Hayes Fry Law. We opened our doors in January of 2015. I have prepared, I can just talk louder.
Yeah, well, we just have online people just so that they can hear you. They can't hear you.
Okay. I had actually prepared a few packages. I wasn't sure how many members we'd have, so I have 7. Might it be appropriate to distribute to you folks, and I'll give 2 to Chad? Okay, I am a practicing lawyer. I do appear in court, and so while I've done this before, being brief is not generally my strong suit. I'm going to read from my notes, partly because I'm a little more nervous. This one's all about me, and also that'll keep me a little briefer. So good morning, council members, and Honourable Mayor, should she attend. Thank you for the opportunity to be here before you this morning to speak to the January 2022 rejection of Hayes Fry Law's DIG program application for a business expansion and retention grant. I've prepared copies of written materials to support my presentation today. Inside you'll find on the left sleeve a copy of my speaking notes, a copy of the original project description. I've highlighted what I think are sort of more relevant to your considerations today. A copy of City Policy 357, again with some relevant portions highlighted. A copy of the email rejection notice that we received January 28th of this year. A copy of the city property tax details for the bare land before project was started. a copy of the city assessment notice and property tax notice as at December 31st, 2021, when I would estimate we had about 40% or 50% of the structure complete. A little by the numbers summary that I prepared. That's the pink tab if you just want to grab that and take a look at that. And on the right side, we've got mock-ups of the project, photos of the project at present. You can hardly tell the difference. And then a copy of our Hayes Fry Law Welcome magazine just for fun. So, like I said, I understand my time is limited. I'll keep my remarks short. I'm happy to address any questions of the panel or gather additional information as requested. I've got 4 real arguments. So, first, I think this project actually meets the policy goals of creating jobs, stimulating the local economy, and expanding a diversified tax base. The project created numerous jobs during construction, has stimulated the economy in virtue of the jobs created and millions of dollars spent purchasing materials from local suppliers. The project has expanded the tax base by an estimated $3.778 million, hopefully more, and diversified that base to the extent that Hayes Fry Law is a professional services business rather than a retail, restaurant, or oil field heavy industry business. The Hayes Fry Law project has already increased jobs and professional legal services and expanded its business opportunities, and the project will allow Hayes Fry Law to continue this mission of growth and expansion. So already the project is demonstrating that it's going to work. Should also add to that there's a need for legal services in Grande Prairie. Grande Prairie's actually lost 5 family lawyers in 2022 alone, which is significant. The market was previously underserved and many residents had to retain services from Edmonton or face long wait times. This hampers life for our citizens and it forces them to spend their dollars in other communities. Our project helps remedy this problem. The city has also announced a strong likelihood that several large industrial projects will move ahead, bringing a large and quick influx of permanent and temporary workers to Grande Prairie. These individuals will need legal services, which our city is not presently able to provide at adequate levels to our existing population. Our project and growth solves this problem. Also tell you a problem that Hayes Fry Law is having, and that is it's very difficult to recruit legal talent up here. We struggle to recruit lawyers to Grande Prairie, and we've had difficulty attracting articling students. We have managed to attract 8 so far. No lawyers. There's presently a large demand for legal talent across Alberta, and Hayes Fry Law offers a progressive work environment and the most competitive compensation structure available in Grande Prairie. Despite this, it has become evident that Hayes Fry Law will need to retain a recruiting firm. We've been in discussions with our preferred recruiting firm for about 6 months now. We've managed to negotiate their fee down from $60,000 to $40,000 per lawyer. That's still very problematic for our young and growing business. We intend that the majority of any funds realized through the DIG program incentives would support our recruitment efforts. Lastly, I'll give you sort of what I'll call the fine print or the splitting hairs. And I am a lawyer and that's my game. So it does appear that the project meets the definition for the Business Retention and Expansion Grant per Policy 357 definitions. And also the project would meet the criteria for the new Business Development Grant, but is $19 million too short despite being at least $4 million in scope. And it would meet the definition for the infill or reuse, but it's 6 blocks in the wrong direction. Grande Prairie has always been a city where small entrepreneurs could grow and flourish. It seems contrary to that ethos and that foundation of our city's success to exclude a multi-million-dollar project that meets all other criteria. We also note that the definition for this grant per the Policy 357 specifically contemplates new construction that enables expanded business opportunities for existing business. The project is only 6 blocks from the commercial infill zone. The project has increased the assessed value by 400% of the minimum amount for eligibility. So we've taken our bare land from about $220,000 with structure on it. We anticipate a $4 million valuation. Behind closed doors, we tell you we're hoping for more, but publicly that's what we're going with. Railtown is an active development, but it was established many years ago, and the site was previously used as a dumping ground for the city. The Hayes Fry Law project, among others, has greatly increased the tax base and utilization of this land within city limits, and we note the area is covered by the residential infill zone as designated. And then lastly, on this fine print one, so from Policy 357, the definition for Business Retention and Expansion Grant means a grant to an existing business or property owner for construction enabling expanded business opportunity, including new construction, infill or adaptive reuse of existing buildings. And I actually have sort of the relevant part from the rejection email copied right below that on my speaking notes. And you'll note that they work us sort of through definitions for A and B, and both of those omit new construction, which is part of the policy definition. And so really to sort of conclude, I'll tell you that it's Hayes Fry Law's belief that our application ought to be approved. We believe the project itself complies with the overall goals of the DIG program and furthers and facilitates Grande Prairie's continued economic growth and development. We believe our project and the growth of our business will put more dollars in city coffers, directly and indirectly, and also provides a valuable and necessary service to residents in an area that is presently underserved. Lastly, we believe the project meets the wording of the city's definition and that the initial rejection was improper. This is a large and risky venture made even worse by the nearly unprecedented rise in interest rates. When we started digging a hole, financing was available at nearly 0%, and we're now looking at something above 5.7 for our takeout. With inflation rates rising and our business and many businesses, along with the interest rates rising, we need the support of the city as we take this leap into our next stage of growth. Those are my submissions.
Excellent timing. Thank you for your presentation. I will now call on number 4, respondent presentation, Chad Sheldon, Economic Development Officer. Just to remind everyone, the questions will come after Chad Sheldon's report. Go ahead, Mr. Sheldon.
Okay, I actually do have some prepared slides, so we'll wait for those to connect. Just stalling while we connect here.
No stalling allowed.
My apologies. Does not like that. So it doesn't drag. That's not even. Here's what I did last time. That's good. Okay, my apologies. Okay, everyone can see that and hear me? Okay, so before we get into specifics on this particular case, I'm just going to highlight some of the key components of policy 357. So that was a policy was approved by council June 14th, 2021. So the policy definitions include very general statements about the BRE grant itself. So in this particular definition, specifically, Mr. Hayes-Rice spoke to new construction. So this grant is to existing or business or property owners for construction enabling expanded business opportunity, including new construction, infill, or adaptive reuse of existing buildings. So that's a general statement suggesting there's opportunity under those potentially eligible projects. The actual specifics come later in the body of policy 357. So I'll skip here through to the actual specific clause in policy 357, which defines the business retention and expansion grant. So this shows 2 types of projects eligible for the BRE grant. So this is what's contained in the policy, and one would relate to expansion of existing business through addition or renovation. And the second is for demolition, infill, rehabilitation, or adaptive reuse of vacant or underutilized land or buildings. So in addition to the policy, 6 weeks later, July 27th, 2021, the procedure 357-1 was approved. That is where we find that the procedure further outlines the specific intent, criteria, and process for this grant. So that procedure was developed in consultation with planning and development, engineering, assessment, director, city manager, and stakeholder feedback, including the Economic Development Advisory Committee, as well as BUILD. So just to highlight quickly some of the relevant clauses that are considered by the review committee. So it's repeated multiple times throughout the application process that work commenced prior to city approval is not eligible for reimbursement. And the procedure defines infill. This is an important clause here. Infill is the development of vacant or underutilized commercial or industrial parcels which were developed at least 20 years ago and do not require further extension of infrastructure. So essentially that's activity on a pre-developed lot. And I won't go through the entire communication history, but we've had multiple conversations with Hayes Fry Law. It actually started interesting prior to launch of the program, and that's because at a council meeting when the policy and these definitions were approved, at that council meeting, we had sent out a media release speaking to an upcoming incentive program called the DIG, Development Incentives and Grants Program. And it was within that period, I guess, of when that policy was approved, there was 6 weeks before the procedure and launch of the program happened. So the media release spoke to application window opening in fall of 2021. Fortunately, we were able to speed that along and officially open applications on July 27th of 2021. So the project, as Mr. Hayes Fry indicated, his project fell right in the, he was starting to dig before the program was able to launch. So July 27th, the program launched, and then we had numerous conversations after that speaking to the potential and options for Hayes Fry. So after 6 months of discussion, Hayes Fry formally applied to the BRE grant January of 2022, so that was January 17th. There was significant construction had occurred, and Mr. Hayes Fry spoke to their rationale behind their appeal. Essentially, it falls outside, they're acknowledging it falls outside of the scope of the DIG program. However, they do request additional consideration. So once their application was submitted on January 17th, that was followed with a review committee review. So that review committee consists of members of planning and development, assessment, engineering, and economic development. The review committee did determine the proposed development did not meet the definition of an infill project. And verbiage was included in the refusal letter that quoted the policy. I've got it on the screen here. I won't read it, but Mr. Hayes Fry has acknowledged that definition as well. So the applicant, at the time of refusal, the applicant was informed of the appeals process, and that is also summarized in procedure 357-1, which brings us to today. That's where we are. And so in 8.3, the Infrastructure and Economic Development Committee may choose to uphold with modification, or overturn the DIG program review. And I guess getting ahead, potentially one question that may come up, so I'll go to one more slide, Chair O'Connor. Should committee determine or choose to overturn the recommendation, I'll just point out there is potential risk that other additional requests for retroactive grant approvals may be requested. So this is just a very quick summary of only projects in Railtown from just prior to the release or the launch of the DIG program. up to current. So it shows 5 projects, an increased assessed value. So essentially the summary here is if additional projects asked for consideration retroactively, there is potentially $325,000 worth of tax rebates that the city would be responsible for retroactively. I'll leave it there, Councillor.
Okay. It's now time for questions. For want of us not running back and forth, I'd recommend Mr. Nathan Hayes Fry come and sit at the opposite mic, and I will now open it up to questions from committee. And first in the queue is Ms. Walsh.
Thank you, Chair O'Connor. Thank you both for attending and giving your statements. My question is, and probably Mr. Fry, you can answer this, is the DIG program started July 27th, 2021. When did you start construction?
We started framing in August of 2021. We dug a hole mid-July.
Mid-July. So footings to this structure were put in place when?
Footings.
The start of the build, right?
Yeah. Very close to August, but I would still say sort of very end of July.
End of July? Okay, thank you. Oh, Mr. Sheldon, if you have anything to add to that?
Sure, through Chair O'Connor. Well, I will report the city issued the building permit July 6th.
I got a nod from Chair O'Connor. I don't have anything to add. I just wanted to let the room know that I'm simply here to observe as I came into this discussion late, so I won't be voting on this item as I came into the discussion after it had started. Thank you.
Thank you. That's fair. Any other questions to either Chad or to Ms. Fry? Councillor Berg.
Thank you. Actually, there's 2 questions, if I may. So the first one is to Chad. Is the idea behind this to apply for the grant before you break ground as kind of a tipping point for a project that may not go through to tip it into a project that would go through? And I guess what I'm getting at is in this case, would the project have gone through with a potential grant or not? Is the idea behind the grant to, again, make something that isn't viable to potentially viable?
Correct. Yes, that is the intent. It's redevelopment, revitalization was the key components of this program. So yes, it was a true incentive, incent projects that wouldn't otherwise have happened. Correct.
And what was the grant amount? 25,000?
So through Chair O'Connor. So the Business Retention and Expansion Grant is a 4-year tax rebate. So on the incremental increased value of the property. So for example, if you have a property worth $1 million pre-construction and it's $5 million post-construction, you've increased your assessment by $4 million. So this tax rebate would reimburse for tax for the municipal portion of the increased assessed value.
Okay.
And that's 100% in year 1, 75 in year 2, 50 year 3, and 25% in year 4.
Okay, so no ceiling then?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You had a second question or not?
Well, I kind of asked 2 there, but I do have another one, and it would be actually for Director Glavin. Director Glavin, we had heard an appeal around a similar project, but it was residential. Do we have precedent on this?
Thank you, Chair O'Connor. To my knowledge, we have not had an appeal of this exact nature. There was one in Hillside that was residential where I believe the applicant or the appellant in that case started their project before they had applied for the grant.
And can I ask what that ruling was?
My recollection is that it was denied. The appeal was denied.
Thank you.
Yes. I recognize Councillor Blackmore. If you had your hand up, if you would like to join the queue.
Councillor O'Connor, I did have my hand up, but I'm going to wait until we go in camera for my comments because they're really not questions.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Bosch.
Thank you, Chair O'Connor. Just one more question to Mr. Sheldon or Mr. Glavin. In this business retention and expansion grant, it says infill rehabilitation or adapted reuse of vacant or underutilized, and then you have the 20 years. Is there options outside of infill on this grant that is noted anywhere? So outside of infill or outside of the 20-year date or outside of the underutilized land or buildings with minimum tax assessment increase of $1 million. So is it strictly infill for this particular grant?
Yes, so through,
And they were designated in a map,
through the
correct?
chair. While they were not designated in a map, they were defined, the general areas or the general intent. They were defined, and then at each application, the review committee determines whether it meets the intent. So the general descriptor of an area that was pre-developed more than 20 years ago is the general premise to the decision.
For me, I think I remember some sort of map that we looked at where there was infill that we had talked about as a council. Am I right on that?
You are, that is on the residential infill
Not the commercial.
grant. So it's part of the DIG program. The DIG program has 5 different incentives. So that was exactly right. We have a defined infill area for the residential projects,
But not commercial.
not commercial. And that's because there are parcels, vacant parcels, scattered throughout the city. So we were making a determination at each application whether they qualified as infill. There was general statements to indicate areas that are new.
Okay. So Railtown is how old?
It began to develop in 2007.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I have a question, and this is regards in point number 4 of Mr. Nathan Hayes Fry report. He had mentioned that we're 6 blocks outside of any infill consideration. Am I correct? And
Thank you for the opportunity to clarify. So, as Chet has mentioned, there's no specific zone like there is for the residential. We do fall inside the residential. It's very large. For commercial, there's no zone defined, but Chad and I did discuss at one of our meetings that there is a plot of land, sort of, I think it's on 97th and Resources. There's an old building there with a big chunk of land that would qualify, and I'm just sort of down the road from it. So that was what I meant by saying that we're 6 blocks sort of out of the zone. Rather, we're 6 blocks away from another piece of vacant land that was deemed to fall within the program.
okay.
That piece of land? There's sort of a large triangle plot right as you turn off of 97th onto Resources.
I'll provide some clarity on that,
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Connor. That's, I think it's called the old ATCO building.
Okay. If not, I see nobody online for any further questions. I see no further questions from any of the committee. We will now move to go in camera. And I need a mover to go in camera, please. Ms. Bosch.
I so move.
Okay. Oh, we needed to have voted, so there's only 3 of us. So call a question to go in camera. Councillor Blackmore, how you vote?
Councillor Blackmore is in favor.
Okay. Okay, that was carried. We'll just give a few seconds for people to vacate the room. Can you switch to the in-camera link, Gladys, please?
Goodbye. Welcome to Zoom. Enter your participant ID. You are in the meeting now. There are 2 participants in the meeting.
Okay. Oh, just one sec. We have a technical glitchy thingy going on. As usual, technical difficulties. The little gremlins are out. No, we're not blaming Gladys. Just want just want to let everybody know that Legislative Services will provide the appellant and the respondent with a written copy of the decision of the committee once reviewed and approved by the committee members. And so we will now resume the meeting under reports. Number 3.1, Director's Service Area Report, Chief Operating Officer, Director I can't even call you Director anymore. Mr. Glavin.
Thank you, Chair O'Connor. We'll start off with economic development. Locally, Invest Grande Prairie is planning to release a story about the Alberta College of Body Art this Thursday through social media and the newsletter, so you can expect to see an interesting story coming up here shortly on that. As well, we've had 7 new businesses open in the last 2 weeks. Last night, representatives from Invest Grande Prairie, along with Mayor Clayton, attended a welcome dinner for the 2022-2023 University of Alberta Year 4 Medical or Doctors of Medicine program to welcome the new students to Grande Prairie. As well, in the Rural Renewal Program, as you're aware, we have now had 27 employers approved. These employers represent 150 positions that are currently available within the community. To date, the city has issued 6 endorsement letters to support new Canadians in their work visa and permanent residency application, with many more to come. One success story that has been fairly quick to emerge with the Rural Renew program is one of our approved employers, Vaniac Logistics, which is a specialized courier service, was previously servicing their Northwestern Alberta operations out of Edmonton and sending employees to Grande Prairie on a rotation. Due to challenges to hiring locally, as a result of the Rural Renewal stream, they have now been able to hire 7 permanent staff and relocated them all to Grande Prairie permanently, and are looking to scale up to 10 permanent employees. In energy and environment, Aquaterra, Goodwill Industries, and the city have partnered for the Drop and Swap event that will happen October 15th from 12 to 4 at the Ernie Radbourne Pavilion. And in advance of that, gently worn clothing can be dropped off at the Ernie Radbourne Pavilion between October 12th and 14th from 12 to 5. In planning and development, planning staff is working with UDI and Build and other stakeholders to identify policies for the municipal development plan that should be reviewed, and that will then be bringing a report forward to committee to outline what the project looks for that review. In transportation, we're currently reviewing school signage at the new Composite High School as they're working through kind of what that looks like and with the opening of the new high school. We're also blading utility lots in the Richmond Industrial Park for better storm drainage. And crews are also hauling dirt to assist with the bull riding event that's occurring this weekend at Bonnett's Energy Center. In parks, we are finishing up tree planting over the next 2 weeks, as well as some leaf cleanup, and we'll be pulling the annual flower beds as necessary with the frost that's on its way. With that, I'll take any questions.
Okay, are there any questions for Mr. Glavin? Seeing none, we will move on to, go ahead, Ms. Bosch.
Thank you, Chair O'Connor. Okay, this isn't anything you talked about, but I'm curious how the pothole situation is going for this time of year and where we are in relation to completing before winter.
Thank you, Chair O'Connor. The bulk of pothole operations typically occurs after the spring thaw. And then throughout the winter as we get the freeze-thaw cycle. After we complete the initial filling of potholes in the spring, it's usually on an as-needed basis, so either as identified by the public or transportation as they're driving around town. And I would encourage anybody that has a particular pothole, if it hasn't been filled, to report it in through the city, and there's a pothole reporting form that you can fill out on the City of Grande Prairie website. And we are fairly quick at getting those filled.
Okay, thank you. I'm just happy to hear that we're like ready to go for the next thaw freeze cycle.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, we'll move on to the next item, and that'll be subdivision Z220008 Countryside Crossing, and we have Olayemi Babalola to be able to do the presentation Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair O'Connor. I will share my slide. Thank you. We have received a subdivision application to subdivide a land that is legally described as Lot 2, Plan 982-2350, and it is located at the intersection of 68th Avenue, 68th Avenue and 92nd Street, as seen outlined in the map that is displayed. The subject land is designated as Urban Reserve District in the Land Use Bylaw, as well as Commercial District. And the Infrastructure and Economic Development Committee is the subdivision authority for lands that is designated as Urban Reserve in our Land Use Bylaw. The proposal is to subdivide 2 lots from the subject parcel for a commercial development and also for a public utility lot. The proposal aligns with all the provincial regulations as well as the city planning documents. So the application was circulated to various agencies, both the internal agency and the external agency, as per the MGA and the subdivision and development regulations. We did not receive any objection from all the agencies that were circulated to. Okay. So a decision was shared, the decision for this subdivision application was shared with the applicant as per the city's practice, and the applicant agrees with the subdivision decision as well as the conditions of approval. So we recommend that the Infrastructure and Economic Development Committee, being the subdivision authority for this application, approve the subdivision decision and the tentative subdivision plan as set out in the Schedule A that is attached in the Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Babalola. Councillor Bosch.
I don't have any questions. I just would move it if anybody doesn't have any questions.
Grande Prairie.
Yeah, thank you, Chair O'Connor. Is it possible to go back to the map? I'm just wondering where access would come from.
Okay. I will show this is where the access is proposed to come from. Sorry, I'm trying to find that. Okay, here. So here, this road widening will provide the access to 92 Street.
Okay, and we're talking about the Lot 2, Block 3?
Lot 1, Block 3. This one.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question, and then Councillor Bessie, you can go first, and then Councillor Blackmore.
Great, thank you. It's more just a process question. It's so this coming to committee because it's urban reserve, correct? Usually, committee wouldn't be involved in subdivisions.
That's correct. Yeah. So for any application that comes for a land that is designated as urban reserve district, it is the committee that is the subdivision authority.
Great, thank you. Yeah, just a general comment that maybe we want to revisit that part of our land use bylaw in the future. It's anytime anything comes to committee, it gets more expensive and it takes more time. And this is an area where I don't know if committee needs to be weighing in on this necessarily. We definitely do under the current land use bylaw. So just a general comment about this might be something we want to revisit in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Blackmore.
Yes, my question is just, I'm asking for a confirmation. The actual road widening of 92nd Street to accommodate that egress, it has already been constructed this summer, correct?
Ms. Donnelly is approaching the microphone. Thank you.
Through the chair, you're correct. The access that would be used for the site was constructed by the city as part of the capital work we were doing along 92nd. It was paid for by this property owner, And so it is been looked at from the engineering department. It's part of the servicing agreement where we confirm how the whole parcel will be serviced and accessed and that sort of thing. So we've already been in consultation with the land developer to determine how that would work. And one of the conditions is a servicing agreement, and that's where we will finalize everything to do with the servicing component.
Yes. I have a question, and I'm not sure who will answer this for me. I'm just concerned that for traffic coming from the south on 92nd Street, is there ability for them to turn left into the property?
Through the chair, yes, there is. There's a dedicated left turn that has been, the line work is actually on the road today. If you were to go there, there were quite a bit of traffic analysis done here. There was a traffic impact analysis that was completed by a professional and reviewed and accepted by the city.
Perfect. Open to any other questions? I see none. I need a mover, please.
Thank you, Chair O'Connor. I do recall us talking about this in the past. I think it was probably with you, Ms. Donnelly, about the roadway and potential development coming in there, and that the developer was willing to put the money in to bring some development to that portion of the city. Just speaking to this, I'm all for development. That, you know, the people who are going to be around that Lot 1, Block 3, I think will appreciate what will be going in there in the future. So I move committee approve the subdivision decision and tentative subdivision plan for Z22-0008 Countryside Crossing as set out in Schedule A.
That motion is in order. We will call the question.
Councillor Blackmore in favor.
That is carried unanimously.
Thank you.
Okay, we will now move on to 3.3, broadleaf weed control. And who is, introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Chair O'Connor. My name is Case DeVries. I'm one of the Parks Supervisors at the City of Grande Prairie. Here today to present the report on the broadleaf weed control. I'll start with the recommendation and then, of course, get into the background and analysis. Recommendation today is that the Infrastructure and Economic Development Committee recommends Council refer 2 seasonal operator positions to increase mowing frequency along arterial corridors within the city to 2023 budget deliberations. A bit of background here. In 2008, Council passed a motion to halt cosmetic use of herbicides on turf, except for in areas such as sports fields and ornamental parks. This 2008 decision was for public lands only, so therefore this allows private landowners the ability to decide if they'd like to use cosmetic herbicides on their own land. Internal analysis was looked at with regards to looking at options for servicing some of our arterial corridors within the city. Parks maintains approximately 75 hectares of turf along these arterial corridors, which is currently mowed on a 2-week mowing rotation. 3 separate surveys have been conducted to assess community opinions on pesticide use in the past. In 2007, with the pesticide opinion survey, 59% had concerns about the use of pesticides and 33% indicated it was not a concern. In 2012, as part of the development of the Parks Master Plan, another survey was conducted where 62% of the respondents agreed with Council's 2008 decision, 22% disagreed. And then again in 2012, during development of the Integrated Pest Management Plan, 65% of respondents indicated it was important for city green spaces to be weed-free, but 94% indicated they do not believe that chemical practices are required to maintain a healthy lawn. So the data from these 3 surveys on file indicates that respondents generally agree with the discontinued use of pesticides in these areas, but of course there is also support for these green spaces to be weed-free. In 2014, the city adopted the pest management policy, which is policy 703. And this policy essentially ensures that the city follows an integrated pest management approach IPM, as it's known, is an approach for managing pests overall that does support less overall pesticide use. In 2020, the city adopted a resolution to be a bee city. Generally, bee cities support and find ways to maintain landscape aesthetics with reduced pesticides. Through bee city, pesticide applications may contaminate nesting materials used by pollinators to construct nests, as some of these weedy species provide resources for pollinators and other beneficial insects. While there is no numerical limit for how much pesticide a municipality can use while still maintaining its bee city designation, increasing pesticide use does move a municipality away from the intent of that program. Some external research was also conducted in 2022. Administration connected with other municipalities to explore what their practices are when it comes to broadleaf and specifically dandelion control. We contacted 8 municipalities in the province. 5 out of 8 of those municipalities do have some form of dandelion control program in place. And further to that, 6 out of the 8 municipalities we spoke with do have increased boulevard mowing frequencies compared to that of Grande Prairie's. So looking at this internal and external research, 4 options are presented in the report when it comes to maintenance of arterial corridors with respect to broadleaf control. The first option is to continue with the approach established in the council motions from 2008. That would be status quo. The second option is the potential increased use of pesticides on those areas in question through a contracted spraying. Option 3 would be to increase the frequency of mowing on the areas in question to ensure that a mechanical control is servicing that area as much as possible prior to those weeds going to seed. And option 4 as well would be to look at naturalizing some of the areas in question, and this would encourage prairie grasslands that do naturally inhibit the growth of broadleaf vegetation. So looking at these options, it is administration's recommendation to proceed with option 3. This option prevents the city from increasing pesticide use on the landscape, and that's per the data from those historical surveys, as well as the integrated pest management plan per policy 703, and the bee city status of the municipality. While an increase in operating costs will be realized with this option, those additional staff will be able to use existing equipment and will be available resources that can assist with other beautification initiatives during times when that weekly mowing frequency is not required, which would be times of drought. Regarding the environmental impact, increased mowing is assessed to be less impactful overall than increasing the pesticide use. The pesticides themselves may increase chances of pesticide drift, which can occur when applying pesticides in large areas. That does and could potentially affect other city assets, as well as neighboring landowners, trees, gardens, and shrubs. It's also important to note that the pesticides themselves would not be selective. There's no dandelion selective pesticide. It would result in a loss of biodiversity on the landscape, as all broadleaf species in that area sprayed would be removed. So that can include things like clover and other effective ground covers. Economically, increasing the mowing frequency may assist in controlling the spread of weeds, so essentially trying to get out and mow the weeds prior to them going to seed, which could potentially be beneficial to private landowners should they have an active weed control program on their lands. Socially, the increased mowing does satisfy those results of the survey data that we have and respects the respondents' general agreements on the reduced use of pesticides. There are some risks with increasing the mowing frequency. Obviously, we're relying on equipment, and so equipment failure can shift frequencies depending on how quickly our mechanics and fleet department can get things up and going for us. And then, of course, as with all parks operations, inclement weather can sometimes shift frequencies of service, as we would avoid having turf damage by putting mowers on wet turf. It's also worth noting some risks regarding increasing pesticide use. As mentioned, that the pesticides would remove all of those broadleaf species, and widespread loss of that ground cover could potentially leave gaps in the aesthetic. So where we have areas on boulevards that are dominated by something like clover, if we were to broadleaf spray, there's the potential that those areas would become barren, and that would, of course, require increased turf maintenance costs for top dressing and overseeding. There's an alternative that is presented in the report, which is to look at a potential pilot study in 2023 of 3 boulevard test plots where we would apply these different options. So we could potentially spray a section of the turf once annually in late summer and assess the effectiveness. We could look at increasing mowing frequency on a section of boulevard, again, to assess the effectiveness. And then we can also evaluate some of our existing naturalized areas along boulevards to assess the persistence of dandelions and other broadleaf weeds. A lot of stakeholder engagement was conducted internally, of course, with our transportation and our environmental services department to evaluate these options. We also worked with 8 other Alberta municipalities, including 3 that are also B cities. In the budget line, option 3 does require the addition of 2 seasonal temporary staff, so the summer staff. They would be able to operate existing equipment, and we would place those staff on an afternoon shift to be able to capitalize on equipment that's existing in our fleet. The operational funding required for these 2 additional seasonal positions is $44,854, which is based on the current collective agreement. Of course, that is within negotiations right now, so that number might change slightly. In summary, administration recommends increased mowing frequencies as the best option to address broadleaf control along arterial corridors within the city. While the financial costs associated with this option are higher than increasing pesticide use, the environmental and social consequences are understood to be lower. So with that, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Case DeVries. My apologies, I didn't have the right page open. So, are there any questions? I have Councillor Blackmore online. You're first in the queue, then Ms. Bosch, then Bressie, then the mayor, and of course, Mr. Thiessen. You may as well get in the queue. We'll get them all in. Okay, questions? Gladys, it's your turn.
Well, thank you so much. I have 2 questions. One is, when we talk about increased mowing, dandelions are a bigger issue in the spring than at any other time of year. Does that mean that we're going to be increasing mowing in the spring and letting the mowers go back to their normal schedule as the summer goes along? That's my first question. I'll wait for an answer for that.
Yes, thank you. Through Chair O'Connor. Yeah, the system would be set up such that those 2 staff would be primarily available for that increased mowing frequency. Throughout any summer season, parks may adjust frequencies depending on things like drought, which is a primary determining factor where we can actually damage the turf more by continuing to mow very dry turf. And so that's where it's indicated in the report that those 2 staff would be able to be a bit flexible, that we would have that very consistent weekly mowing frequency in times of heavy growth, in times when the dandelions are showing, but then the flexibility as well to move those 2 staff off to other projects deemed necessary at the time.
Okay, and you can go ahead with your second question.
My second question is around the opportunity to allow more areas of the city to naturalize or to be seeded, maybe proactively seeded to a variety of clovers, fescues, timothy, etc., as that provides a very good environment for bees and can look quite nice and cuts mowing costs substantially. So I'm wondering if Parks has given any thought to that, or if they're proceeding along those lines in any way, or if that needs to be a discussion for another day.
Yeah, thank you, Chair O'Connor. Parks does actively look for areas where we can capitalize on the use of other ground covers. So as you mentioned, clover. For example, the new Bike Skills Park near Crystal Lake, we've looked at, we've actually placed a lot of clover on the ground in that area, especially near the lakeside, and to ensure that we don't necessarily have to bring in mowers. So where the opportunities do present themselves, we do evaluate that. We've also been working with the development community as well in new development areas and trying to find opportunities that benefit both sides really, where we can do some naturalization that helps keep their maintenance costs down. And then of course, when we take over that land, our maintenance costs can also stay down because those areas have been naturalized from the start. Certainly much easier to naturalize from the start than to try and go back through an area that's been established as mowing turf. So those options are definitely considerations that we take.
Thank you. Next in, So I'll come back to you if you have another one. You still have your hand up. Thank you. Ms. Bosch.
Thank you, Chair O'Connor. My question is, I have two. The issues that we've recently had with foxtails, or foxtail maybe, does this rectify that issue with that particular weed?
Thank you, Chair O'Connor. Increasing frequency of mowing will certainly assist with foxtail. Foxtail is a barley, so it's a grass. It would not be susceptible to a broadleaf pesticide spray. And so how to control foxtail comes down to either using a very harsh pesticide to basically take everything out, or mow more frequently before that would go to seed. So there could potentially be an offshoot benefit for the foxtail issue with increased mowing frequency.
So it is in the locations where we've had the issues, or no?
Through Chair O'Connor, I'd have to follow up on that.
Just to clarify, those are lots that are undeveloped, owned by developers. So it's a different scenario.
That's right. Okay, I did forget that. Okay, thank you. And my second question is, do you kind of know the acres on this? Because yes, there is staffing costs, but the cost of fuel, maybe this sounds like nickeling and diming, but when I cut 3 acres of grass an entire summer, it cost me between $600 and $700. So if you're talking significant acres, I'm just curious.
Yeah, thank you, Chair O'Connor. The total area would be around 75 hectares. So that is currently mowed. It would just be increasing the frequency. So those additional fuel costs are something that our admin staff work with finance on ensuring that are included as well.
Okay, yes. I was just asking so that we included that in with staffing. Is that with the 44 or that just?
Through Chair O'Connor, the 44 is just the staffing.
Okay, thank you.
So there is additional cost. Okay, Councillor Bressy.
Great, thank you. My question is along the lines of what Councillor Blackmore was asking, but I am curious about naturalization. Just you talked a little bit about opportunities you take, but why is the recommendation to increase mowing rather than increasing naturalization?
Yeah, thank you, Chair O'Connor. We did certainly look at some of those options. Naturalization, just like dandelions, very polarizing topic. We wanted to try and keep the recommendation as close in alignment with what our current practice is for the land that's being discussed. So that's why these are hectares of land that we currently mow. So therefore, we would keep that consistent in terms of what recommendation to bring forward. So it was certainly considered and can still be a consideration. It's why we included it as option 4 within the report. The component with naturalization as well is that it does require a little bit more work than just simply stopping the mowing. There would still need to be likely some hand spraying of pesticide to try and get some of the areas that are significantly impacted with broadleaf under control. It might also require some overseeding of naturalized grass seed to get it to that point. So there is some additional upfront, and it takes a few years for that process to really take care of itself after that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Clayton.
My question was asked.
Okay. Councillor Berg.
Yeah, actually, it's along naturalization as well. I do see possibly a hybrid model here where I look at Resources Road. As you're driving south on the right-hand side, there's that big mound. I know that that's a lot of mowing, and I picture Edmonton when you come in on the Yellowhead around 156th. Again, they've planted trees and they've just let it go very naturalized there. So I do realize that parks and different things, mowing would certainly help. But that might be something to consider as well, is on those big strips where it's just a hill and a bunch of lawn, that over the next 4 or 5 years, that's something that we explore, is naturalizing areas like that.
Okay, wonderful. We got all kinds of people coming at us. Oh, I forgot Mr. Thiessen, sorry. And how can I do that, Mr. B. City? Go ahead, Mr. Councillor Thiessen.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair O'Connor. Actually, it was Cindy Park, the twin sister doppelganger of Councillor Bosch here, who initiated the B City conversation, and I was all game on it. And sometimes things go farther when a member of the public presents it to council and committee, and we can run with it. So my question is really along the lines, I do like the idea, the talk around naturalization. I know earlier we had talks about trees. Grant, you alluded to that. So I don't see trees are naturalization, and they're a great way of mitigating dandelion because of the root system. Sort of doesn't give them any opportunities to breathe once they're established. The question's really along the lines of Edmonton's dandelion control policy. So it says in your report here, 2016 they stopped controlling the dandelions. They increased their mowing, and they put a sort of a restriction, a herbicide restriction that they mandated, and they only allow iron chelate and acetic acid. In your discussion with the people at Edmonton, did they lay out some of the challenges that they've experienced through that? I know that we are talking in some instances to spray, but we don't have as many restrictions on it. But did they lay that out and give us a good understanding as to what we could do or probably shouldn't do?
Yeah, thank you. Through Chair O'Connor, good conversation with the City of Edmonton. As noted in the attachment, you're right, they do use iron chelate and acetic acid. The biggest challenge that they've uncovered with that approach, with not using more synthetic pesticide, is that yes, they're not using a synthetic product, but because of what they're using, they end up using a lot more, and so they end up putting a lot more chemical on the landscape. That chemical may have perhaps less impact, but they end up using a lot more. So the individuals that I spoke with felt it was almost a bit of a wash in that circumstance. And so that's certainly a challenge. They did identify as well that moving completely away from herbicide control or synthetic herbicide control has created challenges on their noxious weed control programs, which are, of course, regulated through the province. And so they've had to do a lot of extra work to try and mitigate those weeds. So there were certainly some challenges and continue to be challenges that they face. Edmonton did mention, of course, that when it comes to dandelions, that they've benefited from that weekly mowing to help kind of keep things in check, if you will, before going to seed. And so that was one of the positive components, but certainly some challenges that they faced with their current approach on herbicides.
Yeah, and I can see that. I think as more municipalities move in this direction, as sometimes the bad leaves get out there, like the thistles and stuff like that, which requires that chemical stuff. Just a quick question. I know when we were trying to take care of our lawn and stuff, and we still utilize this to this day, vinegar as sort of non-toxic weed killer, pretty much kills everything. Has our administration looked into that and the costs of maybe employing that instead?
Thank you. Through Chair O'Connor. Yeah, vinegar would be essentially acetic acid, so two in the same. So it would fall in that same category. So again, back to our conversations with the City of Edmonton on some of their challenges that they've had with it. We haven't looked at it in any further detail since those conversations.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that, because I saw acetic acid. I'm like, I think that's vinegar, so I'm going to ask a vinegar question because that's what we do. So thank you very much.
Well, that's great. It encourages bringing your fries when you go out and sit on the lawn somewhere. Anyway, go to Councillor Blackmore online.
I just had a couple of comments. One, acetic acid is pretty darn expensive, I think, when you start to look at the amount of product that needs to get put on. But that's not really a question for our delegation. The other comment I had to make is one of the concerns that was raised when we brought this problem forward a few months ago was directly related to the entrance corridors coming into the city and whether or not we want our entrance features to look full of dandelions or other weeds. And I think one of the ways to move around that issue is to simply delegate them as ornamental areas. That's something that council might want to consider at a future time if we continue to feel that we're not getting enough, we're not looking attractive enough. Personally, I would prefer to fill them with trees, but it's just an idea.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Thank you, Councillor Blackmore. And I'm going to bump Mr. Bressy for the mayor as she tried to get in the queue earlier.
Thanks, Chair O'Connor. Thanks for the report, Case. Just a couple questions. I see 5 of the 8 cities that were surveyed, 3 of the 5 are actually B cities, and they're still controlling dandelions, correct? Okay, so I'm curious, and 6 of the 8 are mowed weekly or have increased mowing, and so of the 6, 3 of them still are B cities, right? So the contracted spraying is how often at the $20,000 amount?
Yeah, thank you. Through Chair O'Connor, that would be for a single fall application, so once annually.
Okay, and the increased mowing is 2 times in addition to what we're already doing, correct?
Thank you. Through Chair O'Connor, yes, it would move it from every 2 weeks of mowing to a weekly mowing rotation.
Okay, so it would be every week. It's not just 2 times overall. All right. So my intent with this conversation is that I think naturalized areas are great in places that aren't used for recreation, that aren't on our corridors, that aren't adjacent to tourism amenities. I think that there are other alternatives, xeriscaping, at our entrance features that would be as impactful. You know, one of our priorities of having fierce community pride, in my opinion, is not letting tourism assets, recreational areas, corridors go to naturalization. Personally, I like how, I think it's Lethbridge and Strathcona, Okotoks, I really like the Okotoks plan, where they're have an established threshold for weed control based on the growth of that. And we've heard in previous discussions that dandelions grow, I think, in a 4-year cycle. So albeit I appreciate my colleagues that are in opposition to spraying at all, I think that there needs to be consideration for spraying on a cycle where we can keep the dandelions and the broadleaf in control. I do like the approach on a trial basis of increasing mowing weekly. But I also like in the Okotoks plan how it talks about the established thresholds. It talks about based on the system, the boulevards are treated every 3 years, which, if I'm calculating correctly, gets us ahead on the broadleaf. But I also do like on the corridors and adjacent to tourism assets that we increase our mowing to weekly. So I'm just doing rough numbers. If that meant in a 4-year budget cycle, council were to approve one spraying of $20,000, and then increasing mowing annually would be $44,854 annually. I think that one increase spraying $20,000 would make a significant amount of difference. I know adjacent property owners that work very hard in the yards, and then they are impacted by our adjacent lands. I think if we could get control of our broadleaf by implementing a system such as those of Okotoks or Lethbridge, even Strathcona's, some sort of plan based on other municipalities. And Okotoks being a B city is probably more comparable to what we're looking at. I would support the motion as suggested, the recommendation from administration. However, following that, I would like to make a subsequent motion and look to council's support to add a spraying this coming summer 2023, and then it'd be considered on a 3-year cycle following that. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Bressy.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just curious. I mean, I've got thoughts about that I'm happy to debate at council. But talking more the procedural, I'm curious why we're talking about staff positions instead of adjusting our service level. I'm a little bit uncomfortable with this, and if it's a one-off thing, that's fine. But I don't think that talking about staff positions is a realistic way for us to talk about this going forward. So, just was there consideration for bringing a service level change to council instead of staff positions, or how will we be navigating this in the future?
Yeah, thank you, Chair O'Connor. It's about the timing of it, and that's really where this comes from. So when the dandelions are in full growth and where we really want to be out mowing at that weekly frequency is also the time where flowers are planted, trees are happening. So there's a lot of demand on crews in that, I'll call it a 4-week window from the end of May to mid-June. And that's really where that additional staffing is required. We've looked at ways where we could potentially shift staff from a crew onto the mowing team to be able to run that equipment in the afternoon. But of course, that leaves us shorthanded in other crews. So it really comes down to the timing. I kind of joked internally with staff, if dandelions bloomed in August, in the end of July, we might have that flexibility, but this is really where it stems from.
Okay, thank you. A supplemental?
Yeah, and Yeah, and I totally get that. I guess I'm just a little bit uncomfortable with how it's framed in terms of I'd rather council be talking about, instead of hiring 2 temporary staff positions, be talking about, hey, we expect dandelions to be mowed X amount in the spring, and here are the budget impacts. It's a subtle one, and it doesn't change the dollars and cents, and I'm fine with it for today, but just in general, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with us talking staff positions instead of service level.
Good point. Mayor Clayton?
Yeah, I appreciate your comments, Councillor Bressie, and I suggest that just to make it cleaner and more comfortable for everybody, whoever puts forward this motion can simply amend the motion to discuss service levels, and administration goes forward to execute as needed.
Yes. We need to look at the business, and who would like to make the motion? Yeah, go ahead, Mayor Clayton.
All right, so I move that the Infrastructure and Economic Development Committee recommend council defer to the fall budget deliberations for the increased mowing frequency along arterials corridors within the city. To, I would say, increase weekly mowing frequency.
Okay.
Well, how about we let her figure it out, okay? Thanks.
Just waiting for it to be scribed, and that is, we will call a question.
Councillor Blackmore is in favor.
That was carried unanimously. And then there is 2 subsequent. O'Connor wants to have a discussion after this next motion. Go ahead, Mayor Clayton.
Thanks, Chair O'Connor. I move that the Infrastructure and Economic Development Committee recommend council approve.
I'm sorry, Jackie, I cannot hear you at all.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I would move that the Infrastructure and Economic Development Committee recommend council implement contracted spraying discussion for 2023 to the fall budget deliberations.
2022 budget or 2023? Thank you. That motion's in order. Call the
Councillor
question.
Blackmore's in favor.
Okay, call the question.
Blackmore's in favor.
Thank you.
I had a question for administration, but I'll go after you because I think you have one.
Yes, I'm after listening to the discussion on what councillors Blackmore and Thiessen and Bosch, most of you, and I think that it's important that we ask administration. I can't make the motion, but I'd like to have somebody else make the motion, that we ask administration to come back with some recommendations of the beautification of our entries and what kind of planting goes in there, and what the budget ramification would be for that, so that we can beautify and have our city where we're not maintaining it. It's going to be there. It's going to look beautiful, and I think we should be doing that. And I would love it if somebody would make that motion for me to.
I think Director Glavin has some comments for you.
Okay, go for it, Mr. Glavin.
Thank you, Councillor O'Connor. At the next committee meeting, we're bringing back the urban forest strategy, and I think it'll have some content directly related to that. And I would suggest that it might make more sense to have a motion similar to what you're thinking, if that's insufficient.
Okay, sounds great, and that will speed things along. Thank you very much.
Just had a question.
Go ahead, question.
Thanks. Mr. DeVries, can you tell me, at the fall budget deliberation, if council supports the increased mowing frequency as well as potentially the spraying, at that time, would you expect to come back with a report of what that will look like? I guess what I'm getting at is when you look at the Okotoks plan, it has thresholds, etc. Would your expectation be that you would come back with a relatively defined process, or would it simply just be we mow every week, we spray, council could amend the frequency of spraying, or would you come back with a more sort of defined plan?
Thank you. Through Chair O'Connor. With the mowing, we would probably just execute that as it goes. And then based on the recommendation for the spraying, if it's once every 3 years, if that's what the funding is for, then we would follow that sort of a schedule likely, which is similar to, as you mentioned, Okotoks and Lethbridge and others that have sort of a, spray 1 year and then skip a couple of years and then spray again. So we would probably just go forward with the plan.
I guess I just have a question for you as the expert. Do we assume that dandelion growth on a 4-year cycle is pretty regular, or is it possible that 1 year we just don't see it and it would be too late for us to identify that and we would just spray regardless if it was our year to spray?
Thank you. Through Chair O'Connor, we would likely do the first application and then evaluate that to understand did it work to what our success is? And if we find that say, let's call it a 3-year cycle, isn't going to meet what potentially we're looking for, we would come back at that point.
Yeah, and I guess that's more what I think you nailed it. I think that it's the evaluation of how the mowing's going, the spraying's going, so we can talk about that, whether or not council does or doesn't support it after fall budget, to talk about the frequency of the updates and the evaluation of it. Thank you.
Yeah, and just one more question, Mr. DeVries. I noticed that, does this mean then in your report, doing 3 test areas would not be done?
Thank you, Chair O'Connor. That was an alternative that we could look at some test plots, so that's correct. Based on the motions from today, we would not move with the pilot. We would just move with the motions from committee.
Perfect. Thank you for that clarification. And Councillor Bressy and Councillor Thiessen.
Yeah, thank you. For me personally, I would love us to see what a naturalized boulevard looks like. I totally get what Mayor Clayton's saying is we don't want our main arterials to look ugly. But I think in some communities I've noticed naturalization looks really good. And sometimes it is really ugly. And honestly, I have troubles picturing what it would look like in Grande Prairie along an arterial. And I think it's worth us checking out and trying. I know what it looks like in places not along arterials. But I think it's worth us trying out and seeing what it looks like. And I guess my question is maybe somebody on committee is willing to make a motion, but if not, where should I be? Where's an appropriate place for me to be bringing up?
Yes, Chief Operating Officer Glavin.
Thank you, Director, Councillor O'Connor. May as well both make a mistake on that. Right now, if you wanted to look at the test area of this would be on 68th Avenue in Kateri, so right across from the old ATB Bank and Grand Banks. So there is a section there that was naturalized due to the steepness of the slope.
So you have a test? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, would we expect naturalization citywide to look pretty similar to that, or is that a unique place because of that slope?
Thank you, Chair O'Connor. That is a unique place because of the slope. If we were to look at applying it in other areas that we currently mow, that would also be a good sort of visual for anybody who's interested in what that would look like long term. So if you wanted to take that visual and apply it, say, to Resources Road, it would look very similar.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, now give the mayor the last shot at this. I think we need to move on. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay, you want to be last? Okay.
I just had a comment for Councillor Bressy. I guess if you were looking for something else, I suggest when we come to council discussion on the spraying and the potential of mowing, bring it up there.
My question, I'm not clear on this motion. Is this coming to council for council to refer to budget deliberations, or is this going straight to budget deliberations? Gotcha. Okay. I didn't want to necessarily talk about it in budget deliberations, but this works for me then. Thank you.
Thank you. And now you have the last word. I must remind everybody we need to move this meeting along. Mr. Thiessen.
Yeah, no, so I guess in our role, we're supposed to be able to change at any given moment and listen to the debate and not have our mind made up. But unfortunately, I'm pretty 95% close to mind made up, and I hate to admit that, but it's true. I'm not a big fan of I'm not a big proponent of spraying broadleaf. And I find that there's sometimes some of these weeds that we call weeds are a lot more beneficial in the grander nutrition cycle of things if we just looked at things differently. My question is for Mr. DeVries, and I'll probably bring it up. You mentioned earlier in your report today about the potential for that aerosol drift. So immediately in my head, I started thinking about COVID. And if you remember all those sneeze diagrams, you're in the, you know, if that came from Finland, I think. You sneeze in one aisle and then your COVID travels 6 aisles down and then eventually encompasses the whole grocery store. I know that's an extreme. I know why that was put out there. But when I think of this aerosol drift, there's maybe some unintended complications with that could happen, especially if we go with one big broad spray one year. We could see a decline in bee population. We could see other issues. But do you share some of those concerns, or could it be that bad? For sure. The reason I asked the question, Your Worship, is because I don't want to lose it on the page. One of our administration said one of the concerns about maybe going to a spray was the fact that it could drift, and I just want to explore that a little bit here while it's still top of mind.
Okay. Okay. Is there a motion on the floor? Okay, good. We need to move along, and we will move to number 7, outstanding items list. Chief Operating Officer Glavin.
Thank you, Chair O'Connor. So today we dealt with item 1206 with regard to broadleaf spraying, and with that, everything else is on schedule.
Okay, I will entertain a motion. Okay, Councillor Bosch.
Thank you, Chair O'Connor. I move that committee receive the September 27th, 2022 outstanding items list as amended for information.
Thank you. That motion's in order. Call the question.
Councillor Blackmore is in favor.
Mayor Clayton in favor.
And that's carried unanimously. We will adjourn the meeting. Is there a break?
So I'll be chairing the next meeting. I think it's going to be a pretty short meeting, so I'd like to start as soon as tech allows us, if that's okay with everybody else. Okay. So I'll just look at IT services, and when you give me the wave, I'll get us going.